Thanks, Natasha. Yeah, my name's Neil Armstrong. I'm from TribePad. I'm wearing my new varifocal glasses for the first time. So if I sort of keep doing that throughout the presentation, I'm trying to figure out who's in focus at the moment and whether the laptop's in focus. So please bear with me. I'm going to share some brand new research with you today. It's the first time I've presented it. So you're definitely going to go away with some new information and some insights into what candidates are thinking, but also what the actual outcomes from some recruitment are. What I hope you also take away is some ideas and things to look for in your own recruitment process and have a little dig around what might be happening in your candidate funnel. First, I'm going to take you on a little emotional journey. And it was my emotional journey from anger to disappointment through to a sort of determination and then hopefulness. And it all happened within the space of about a second when I read this post on LinkedIn, which made my blood boil, and then I calmed myself a little. So I'll let you read it for a second. This was posted by somebody from within our industry who's actually quite experienced when you look at their background on LinkedIn. And it's really asking the question about ED&I questions, and in particular, one about your background and what the main household income earner, what their job was when you were a child. And the first comment on the chain, and I'm just going to stress, I haven't included any comments from sort of candidates or people outside of the industry. I've only selected comments from people who work as recruitment professionals. Okay. You're probably still working your way through those. Basically, there's a massive amount of mistrust and a lack of information, even within recruitment professionals, about what we're trying to achieve. Really interesting, the first slide Natasha put up at the front of the day where you all said basically attracting candidates from different backgrounds is one of the biggest challenges. Well, part of the challenge is in this room and in our teams. And candidates are even less trusting than recruiters are. So we're going to get into some data. You've probably just enjoyed some coffee and biscuits, which we've probably paid for, so I've got to do a quick advert about TribePad, so apologies, I'll make it as quick as I possibly can. If you want to apply for a job in over 150 of the UK's best-known companies, your candidates are using TribePad, so whether that's serving sausage rolls in Greggs, saving lives in the NHS, forecasting the weather, or one of my good friends over there from the Church of England, if you want to apply to be a bishop, that also happens through TribePad. So our mission is to make recruitment fairer, faster and better. We provide an applicant tracking system, onboarding platform, video interviewing, and a great big partner ecosystem where we've got integrations with more than 100 different specialist solutions for recruitment marketing, so Veritone, who were on earlier, for example, candidate assessments, where you can get rid of CVs and have much better job-based assessments, video interviewing tools, right-to-work checks, background checks, and of course the HR platform, so you can actually onboard, employ, and pay your new staff. That's it. No other sales. Hopefully I got through that in less than a minute. So what I'm going to take you through is an update to our Stop the Bias survey. We started this back in 2022 when we asked candidates what they were concerned about in terms of bias in the recruitment process. And we also asked recruiters what they were working on. And what we discovered was a disconnect between the priorities that recruiters were working on didn't align very well with the things that candidates were worried about. But what we really wanted to do was then look at actual hiring outcomes. So not just asking people what they thought, but looking at the data to see what actually happens. And that has been very enlightening and a bit controversial. So it's taken us a little while to put this data together because we needed to go back to panels of DEI experts and talent acquisition experts to help us interpret the data and try to figure out what was going on. As with all data, it's not all black and white. Excuse the pun, kind of deliberate, but the marketing guys made me put that in. So, what are candidates most worried about? So, quick shout out of 10, what proportion of candidates do you think are worried that they're going to experience bias in the recruitment process? I heard a 5, I've heard an 8. We'll go with 5 or 8. I think I heard a 10 over there possibly. So the answer is 9 out of 10 candidates, 89% of people we surveyed said they were worried about bias in the process. So I think we can agree there must be bias if 89% of people are worried about it. Believe it or not, this has actually come down since we asked the same question in 2022 when it was 94%. So a huge proportion of candidates are worried that the recruitment process is presumably biased against them. So if I go back to my introduction, that LinkedIn post about asking DEI questions, do candidates trust us when we ask those questions? Well, the short answer is no, they don't. So if you look over here, the orange bar, do you trust recruiters with this data? Only 33% of candidates trust us when we're asking those questions about ethnicity, about gender, about what the main household income earner was when you were a child. Now, the good news is that has actually increased in the last 2 years from 24%, so that's good news. But we've seen a couple of mentions already today about, I thought the case study from Newton, for example, was excellent. Having that data allows you to understand what's going right, what's going wrong, and allows you to change your process to deliver better outcomes. So if you can't capture that data in the first place because the candidates don't trust you with the data, how can we improve the process? I don't think there's really, easy answers to that, but hopefully that's something that we can, discuss in the round tables later. It does vary by age. So on the far left-hand side, purple bar, 47% of 18 to 24-year-olds do trust us with that question, with us collecting DEI questions. But if we look over on the right-hand side, 55 to 64-year-olds, only 21% trust us and 44% don't. So, younger people generally are more trusting. Is that because they care less about their data because we've already given everything away to social media so they don't worry anymore? And I realise it's a bit of a stretch when I say we, because I'm very definitely not in the 18 to 24 category anymore, unfortunately. But basically, younger people are more trusting. Okay, so is that going to help us as that workforce ages in terms of collecting that data? TribePad actually developed one of the UK's first anonymous application modules within our applicant tracking system. We worked with the BBC and Sodexo to develop it nearly 10 years ago. When we asked candidates, would you prefer to go through a recruitment process that is anonymised, 76% said yes. So 3/4 of candidates would be, although they're particularly younger candidates are happy to answer the questions, they'd still rather that information was used anonymously and candidates are judged on their merits and their skills. And that's even higher within 18 to 24-year-olds. Now, looking at our own data, only 4% of jobs that go through our platform actually use our anonymisation process, which has doubled year on year for the last 3 years. So as an industry, we are slowly adopting anonymisation. But again, there's a clear disconnect between what candidates want and what we as recruiters are actually providing in our experience. So it'd be interesting to touch on that in terms of where's the resistance, why is the resistance, what's not working that we're not delivering something that 75% of candidates want us to do. So what are candidates worried about? So this is the list of things. If you ask candidates, what biases are you worried about in the recruitment process? This is what they answer. So 57% of people are worried about age. Well, that's kind of obvious that that's going to be the number one because we are all going to age. And as my mother said, aging sucks, but it's better than the alternative. She's probably nicked that from somebody else, but I credit it to my mum. Other things on there, personal appearance, disability, mental health, weight. Interestingly, those have all increased over the last few years. Likely there's a correlation there between COVID, people working from home, feeling more isolated, perhaps not being able to look after themselves in the same way, not commuting, and getting more and more worried about that. Mental health in particular has seen a really, really big jump. Government data, again, shows an increase in mental health conditions in adults, particularly in the working age following COVID. Weight, personal appearance on there as well. Being a parent, people are more worried about that, and pregnancy is on the rise as well in terms of people being concerned about that. What really strikes me here, though, is when we ask recruiters, what are you working on, what are your focuses in terms of your DEI activities, they usually say gender, ethnicity, and disability are quite often the top three. Almost nobody's talking about personal appearance, age, and things like that in the process. And talking of age, there seems to be quite a lot of unhappiness when it comes to age. If you're 18 to 24, 52% of people worry that they're too young for the job. There's a little sweet spot where we're happy, and then really quickly, 35 to 44, and tragically I have now skipped over into this box, we think we're too old. So there's a really short sweet spot where we're not worried about age in the recruitment process, but basically you're either worried you're too young or you're worried you're too old. And when we take some sort of verbatim comments from that, you start to see the lived experience that people have in the recruitment process and have in the employment process that gives credence to that data. Why are people worried about age? Well, because they experience it, or they certainly feel that they experience that bias when it comes to age for all kinds of different reasons. So it'd be really interesting to see how does that tally with what you think's happening in your recruitment process? Does that tally with what candidates are telling you in the feedback and perhaps exit interviews from your own employees? Gender. Unsurprisingly, women are more concerned about gender bias than men are. That's pretty obvious. 1 in 6 believe they're at risk of discrimination. Interestingly, 1 in 10 males feel that they're subject of discrimination as well. The good news is both are slightly down, very slightly, compared to the previous survey that we did. And being a parent or being pregnant is still a huge fear and is on the rise in terms of women being worried about how they're going to be treated in the recruitment process if they're pregnant, or even more so if they're already a parent. So 1 in 4 concerned that being a parent is going to hold them back, and 1 in 5 concerned about pregnancy. So real concerns there about discrimination, which again probably isn't featuring in our D&I priorities in the recruitment process. Again, just thinking about the sort of comment that we received about lived experience, probably resonates with people in this room. Now, as a proud northerner, which you might not tell from my accent, again, it's quite interesting that there's quite a lot of fear of prejudice out there about your accent, how you sound. And again, that sort of resonates from other things we've heard. So the northwest of England, the West Midlands, Wales in particular, are hotspots where people are worried that they're going to be judged unfairly because of how they sound. So this, potentially plays into video interviews, telephone interviews, face-to-face interviews, perhaps even in the screening process if we're looking at people's CVs. So interesting one. We're all doing bias training within the organisation. Does accent feature as part of that training, for example? It probably should, because it's something that a reasonable number of candidates are worried about. So that's what candidates are telling us. So now let's look at some actual data that shows us what's actually happening. So do the fears reflect the reality? So the methodology that we took here, we analysed about 2 million completed applications. Now, these come from a selection of TribePad customers. So we handle about 15 million job applications a year. So it's still a sample, but it's a pretty big number of 2 million. And what we looked at was basically who made it through the process from application to completed application, shortlist, interview, offer, and hire, and looked at the different sort of proportion of people who were making it all the way through the funnel. The result was about 66,000 hires that we analysed. So I'll talk you through that. We basically, this is an example here of looking at candidates who were aged 25 or under. So we start at the top with about 930,000 applications, filtered down about 11% of those, so about 100,000 make it onto the shortlists, just short of 5%, so 42,000 make it to interview, down to 4% who are offered, so that's 38,000 there, and the end result, just over 3%, so about 30,000 people are hired looking at this particular funnel. Make sense? Seeing a few nods in the room, so hopefully that all makes sense. So then if we compare, again, looking at these different age groups, so if you're 25 or under, about 3.2% of people make it from completed application to hire. Very, very similar if you're 26 to 55. Interestingly, if you're over 55, 5% of people make it to the bottom of the funnel. So go back to what candidates were worried about. By a long way, the largest concern was people thinking they were too old for the job. But when you look at the data, they're actually more likely to make it to the bottom of the process. Well, why? Lots of different reasons. Over 55s account for 6.1% of roles filled, despite only being 4% of applications. What will be really interesting is to understand what sort of jobs those were. Are candidates over 55 more likely to be very discerning and apply for a small number of jobs that they think they've got a really good fit for, rather than perhaps candidates who are 18 to 24, perhaps firing out 50, 60, 70, 100 different applications a week for all sorts of jobs that they might not be a good fit for? Hard to know. Good one to debate to find out. Now let's look at gender. Again, a big concern. People worried about their gender is going to be a disadvantage, particularly for women. Well, the good news here is we found that men were more likely to apply for more roles than women. I think we've seen research, I can't remember which academic institute it was, but it was the idea that men, if they had a 60% fit with the job role, they would apply and sort of chance it. Women were more likely to only apply for roles where they felt they had 80% or more fit to the application. So men are applying for more roles, but women are more likely to make it to the end of the process in terms of being hired, only slightly. I should say we did collect data for non-binary, but the sample size was too small to be able to give an accurate analysis. But encouraging news here that there doesn't appear, based on the data, to be a big disadvantage in terms of being female and applying for these roles. Ethnicity and race. Now this is where it gets more difficult. White candidates, and I should say at this point, we've had to simplify the data quite a lot because different customers use different classifications. So for example, some customers might have a drop-down list with 20 different options: white British, white mixed, white British Asian, etc., etc. We've had to simplify and group things together in order to make the analysis sort of usable, and we've done those as best we can. So let's start with white candidates. They make up 52% of applications, resulting in 63% of those getting shortlisted, resulting in about 75% of hires. Immediate conclusion: looks like being white's an advantage. Looking at the other way around, black candidates, for example, make up 12% of applications. That reduces to 9.4% of shortlist and reduces to just short of 7% of hires. Looks like it's a disadvantage to identify from that background. So it looks pretty concerning because this looks like, from a sample of about 2 million completed job applications, that people's lived experience and fears of the recruitment process being biased, it looks right. So I mentioned earlier that we had several different roundtables with DEI experts, talent acquisition experts, to look into the data and understand a little bit more about what might be going on. And I'll come back to that in just a minute, but a really interesting one to debate this afternoon in the round tables. Because just looking at the data in a spreadsheet doesn't necessarily tell you what's going on and doesn't necessarily give you the reasons behind the data. So we looked through a different lens and we compared the data we had versus the ONS census data from a couple of years ago. So this presents things in a completely different light. So again, I'll use a couple of examples. Candidates who identified as being from an Asian background, shortlisted for about 25%, 24% of roles, offered 15% of roles, but actually only make up about 9% of the population. So all of a sudden it looks like they're being overrepresented in the hired data. A similar pattern for candidates who identify as black. Shortlisted for 9.4% of roles, offered 6.9% of roles, but make up only 4% of the population. So when we first saw this, I've got to be honest, we got a little bit worried. I was thinking, if the Daily Mail gets hold of this, they're going to be like, they're taking our jobs, and we're going to be in a whole world of shit. So we'd better really make sure we've got our data right here. So when we talk to our TA and DEI experts about, this is a bit of a surprise. I wasn't expecting to see this, and it doesn't tally with what we know from lived experience. What's going on? And one answer that came out straight away was, if you think about the organizations who are in this room, and we think about our customers, generally if you're using technology at scale, for lots of blue-collar roles. So programmatic advertising, for example, we heard from Veritone, that's really popular in blue-collar roles. So is it a case that actually candidates from BAME ethnicity backgrounds are actually being disproportionately hired in lower-paying roles, for example, healthcare, retail, hospitality, logistics, and that's actually skewing the data? So is that what we're seeing in our data? Really hard to know, but what we do know is there is undoubtedly prejudice, there is undoubtedly bias, but it depends how you look at the data, and that's where it's quite nuanced, and it's hard to draw definitive conclusions, and I think it really highlights the importance of having qualitative data as well as quantitative data before you can make conclusions. I think one of the other things that's really key here is geography. So one of our customers in the West Midlands, it's a council authority where 49% of the population is from BAME background. So they're going to have radically different recruitment outcomes to, for example, a retailer based up in the northeast of England, where only 9% of the population identifies as BAME. So there's a lot of nuance here to think about. Seniority of data as well. So this isn't our data, this is from the ONS, where it's looking at the ethnicity of the chief executive officer in organizations, I think it's organizations above 1,000 employees. And actually in those cases, we see that, for example, Indian or Chinese ethnicities are more likely to be CEO, or at least disproportionate compared to their representation in the overall population. So there's all sorts of conflicting data out there. One of the things that we really want to do with our data next time is try to look at the seniority of the role and the geography of the role, as well as ethnicity, gender, and how far candidates make it through that recruitment funnel. So lots of different ideas for research in the future. So at Tripod, to conclude, our mission is to make recruitment fairer, faster, and better. That's why we do this research. We know what people are worried about. We've got our own data to see what we think is actually happening. And we think this is the largest analysis of this sort of data that's happened in the UK so far. So the question is, what can we collectively do about it as recruitment leaders? So first off, I think, we think it's really important to make logical decisions that are rooted in data, but those data have to be supported by qualitative feedback from experts, from stories, from lived experience, to provide context to those data. So you could see by those slides I just presented, you look through one lens and it looks awful. You look through another lens and it looks great. You've actually got to look at the data several different ways and really interrogate in your own organization what's going on. And in terms of assessing your hiring process, actually, we all talked about how difficult it is to attract employees from different backgrounds. One of the things I showed at the start was we analysed 2.5 million applications, but that resulted in 2 million completed applications. So the question is, who's starting the recruitment process and then dropping out? Perhaps they don't feel they see representation on your website. Perhaps your recruitment process is putting them off in terms of neurodiversity. Perhaps they get to the interview process and see a panel of people that doesn't represent them and they don't feel welcome. That would be really interesting to dive into next time. What's that invisible dropout? And how is the TA strategy integrated into the wider business strategy? Are people progressing from junior roles? Are they progressing up through the organization? Are people leaving too quickly? Are the committees and representation sort of task force you have in your organization, are they informing what's happening and helping you in recruitment? Certainly, we know that transparency is really important, and having activities that are genuine and are really critical, because new candidates will see through that smoke screen of people trying to do the right thing, put a few images on the website, tick the box, but actually when they get into the recruitment process or actually get into the business, that's not really what's going on in the organization, and they're probably going to leave pretty quickly. And then finally, I really think that quality DEI data is really important to help us get to the nub of the issues and really work out what's working, which teams are doing well, which processes are working, what's not working. So building that trust with candidates, convincing them that you are genuine, you have their interests at heart, you are genuinely trying to improve your process and make recruitment fairer, faster and better, is a really, really critical thing. So having that rounded data and getting candidates bought into why you're asking them these questions and why it's in their interest to answer them genuinely, I think is really, really critical and key to getting the right understanding. Thank you very much for listening. We've got a stand out the back. You can get copies of our research. We also have loads of these very handy multi-chargers, which are also very popular. Please come and take them, because otherwise I've got to carry them back on the train and my back's already hurting. So yeah, please download the survey and share it, and thank you very much.